We've been discussing refuge up to this point, and today's class will be the last session talking about this. So before one goes for refuge, it's good if you can meditate on the image of the Buddha in front of you as your object of refuge. And of course, contemplate the causes of refuge because they are the prerequisites required before you actually take refuge. So the prerequisites are fear and faith. We discussed that there are three types of fear. Fear that pertains to the lower scope, which is fear of the lower realms. Fear that pertains to that of the middle scope, which is fear of the entirety of samsara. And fear pertaining to the greater scope, which can be said to be fear of the two obscurations together with their imprints. So before we move on, we'll stay on the topic of fear for a little bit and how we can bring that into our reality, into our practice. So let's contemplate the cause of fear. So now that you've seated yourselves and you're relaxed, you can follow along as it's explained. So we need to apply it to our own situation, of course, not think about it in an abstract, general way. Okay, so we've achieved a human rebirth, fortunately. We're also fortunate enough to be practitioners of the Dharma, right? We're here. We have many things in our life that cause us to be afraid and give rise to fear, but that's not a cause of refuge necessarily. So we need to be specific about what kind of fear is the cause of refuge. And as Chandrakirti said, the three jewels are the refuge for those who desire liberation. So as ones who desire liberation, we need to be concerned about our future lives and have fear primarily with respect to that right now as a basis. And also, as you're contemplating this, you need to give rise to a feeling of fear. It's not so much to think of it intellectually, it needs to really come down into your own experience. So think about now how death, the time of death is uncertain. You don't know how much time you have left. You only know that you will die at some point. So you can go for your annual checkup to the doctor and he can say, you're healthy, you've got at least 10, 20, 30 years left. But that doesn't negate the fact that anything could happen in your life. Any sort of accident could cause you to die, right? So it is entirely uncertain when your death will come. So therefore, you need to think that you should practice Dharma quickly, do it now. You shouldn't postpone it till tomorrow or next week and think, I'll get around to it someday, right? Because plans fail often, don't they? Right? So don't postpone it. Don't make a future plan out of it. You need to practice Dharma quickly and do it now, right? And as it is said, it is only Dharma that helps at the time of death. So understanding that only Dharma is going to help us when we die, in the sense that it is going to determine our future lives. Right now in this life, you need to stop accumulating negative deeds. You need to stop harming other beings. After death, we know for sure that if we practice virtue, it is virtue that is going to lead us to a higher rebirth, and our non-virtue that is going to take us down to the lower realms. And we also know that predominantly in this life, we have accumulated non-virtue. So now our non-virtue just comes naturally and it interrupts our Dharma practice. Think how it even interrupts your practice of refuge, right? How much you would have tried to implement this advice and how non-virtue can affect your doing so. For example, when you get angry, how it can upset your mind for an entire day or a week or even a month, right? Just mulling on the thought. So our familiarization or habituation with virtue is little, and our habituation with non-virtue is great. So thinking of this, there's such a great risk that I might fall to the lower realms after I die. So I'm explaining a sequence of meditation or contemplation. So while I'm talking in Tibetan, you have a pause in your listening where you can continue to reflect on what I've said. So now I've taken you through a contemplation of fear with respect to the lower realms. So it's fear in the context of a lower scope practitioner, right? That's their cause for refuge. Of course, one doesn't stop there, but one needs to start there because in order to get to fear of samsara and a greater scope fear, one needs to start from the bottom, like climbing a ladder. So even if you take a rebirth out of the lower realms, it's not necessarily going to be a rebirth that's conducive to Dharma practice, right? We know that, right? Even as a human. If we think about animal rebirths, for example, they're completely replete with the conditions for accumulating non-virtue. And they have barely any conditions for accumulating virtue. Think how an animal rebirth is not a basis for practicing ethical discipline and holding certain vows. And we know that maintaining ethical discipline is a principal cause for taking a higher rebirth. So they are bereft of that opportunity. And then even if you take a human rebirth, it's not necessarily one of opportunity to practice Dharma. And we know that in general, all rebirths within samsara are affected by birth, aging, sickness, and death, or at least 3 out of those causes. So thinking of this, we need to generate a thought that I need to get out of samsara. We need to desire liberation from samsara in its entirety. So even if you were to free yourself from samsara, it's, if you think about it in a more broad scope, it's not amazing in and of itself that you escape and so many others are left behind, right? All mother sentient beings have been incredibly kind to you, so if they were to remain in samsara, that's unacceptable. As I quoted in one of the previous sessions from Shantideva's Bodhisattva's Way, he said, to paraphrase, he says, why should I have so much respect for the Buddha but not for sentient beings? So in your practice of the 6 perfections and so forth, of generosity, patience, ethics, the basis of those practices is sentient beings, right? You depend entirely on other sentient beings, even for your subsistence, right? Whether it be your clothes, your food, your shelter, that all comes about in dependence on the kindness of others, right? You wouldn't be able to fend for yourself alone in the world. So think about the kindness of everyone else in this way. And if they have been so kind to you that then it is only appropriate that you repay that kindness. But are you able to do so now? Well, not really. Here in your country, you're involved in so many amazing events and you have so many opportunities, and you have opportunities that not many have, right? So you need to engage in such things with the motivation that you're doing so for other sentient beings. You're trying to serve other sentient beings. So we need to develop the thought, may all sentient beings be free from afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations within samsara, right? May they escape from all of those. Right, so it's not appropriate that oneself alone is freed from the afflictive and cognitive obscurations, but oneself and all other sentient beings should be free from the afflictive and cognitive obscurations. But who has the power to free them? It is only the 3 jewels, right? And by understanding the qualities of the Buddha jewel, you understand the qualities of the Dharma and Sangha jewel by default, right? The qualities of the Buddha were not something that he hid, right? But that which he taught to all, and he taught everybody the methods to achieve them. And that is the Dharma, and it is the Sangha that upholds those methods and teachings to achieve them, right? So we can understand the three jewels simply in that way. So reflecting on these qualities and also the qualities of the Buddha that I taught in a previous session, which are that he is one who is free of all fears, who is skilled in the means of freeing others from fear, who has great impartial compassion for everyone, and who acts for everyone's welfare, regardless of whether or not they have benefited him. We generate faith. And first generating that faith, we then put our hands together, right, in Anjali Mudra, and then we recite the verse of refuge, or we say Namo Guru, Namo Guru, Namo Buddha, and whatever verse in whatever language you prefer to recite that is related to refuge. You say that, and you also visualize the image of the Buddha in front of you. And in that way, it's a very simple but powerful practice of going for refuge. So it's important that your speech and your thoughts are connected, not that you're going through the motions absent-mindedly, right? When your physical body through the mudra of Anjali is performed along with recitation, along with a good thought of refuge, it's very powerful, right? When body, speech, and mind come together. So you can it's good if you can also recite the refuge verse multiple times, right? Do a mala of it, for example, while combining body, speech, and mind. So when you go for refuge, before that, you need to think of your object of refuge, so an image of the Buddha, and you need to think of the causes for refuge, fear and faith. So preferably while you're at home, relaxed, if the conditions are right for it, right? Sit down, you have your little meditation. You first contemplate the Buddha's form, right? Your object of refuge. And then you contemplate fear and faith as your prerequisites to refuge, and contemplate it just as I took you through it. And then once you've developed some feeling of that, you recite the refuge verse. And if you can't go through that procedure because you're busy, right? Your schedule doesn't allow for it. At least carry this sense of fear and faith, right? This sense that only the three jewels can protect me from the fears of samsara, right? I think, as Tibetans say, think of me, right? They supplicate the three jewels by saying, think of me, think of me. As I explained before, a greater scope refuge connects it to all sentient beings, thinking, may they be free from all obscurations within samsara. May they free themselves and attain liberation. And, may the three jewels think of them. But we can't necessarily engender such a great scope motivation at all times. And if you can't do that, then you can bring it down to the level of the medium scope, which is, may I be free from samsara. Only the three jewels have such a potential to free me from that. And that is still a Buddhist refuge. And even if you can't think on that level, if you just think of being free from the lower realms and how the three jewels have the capacity, only the three jewels have the capacity to free you from the lower realms, that is still a Buddhist refuge. Anything less than that is no longer a Buddhist refuge. And as I explained, it's important to remember that sometimes your refuge doesn't involve refuge to all three jewels, and it's still okay, right? For certain activities, you might just take refuge in Tara or in medicine Buddha, right? And that's okay. Whether it becomes a Buddhist practice or a practice of refuge or not depends on your motivation behind it. So when we encounter difficulties or hard times, we do pujas, for example, make prayers, and they're always done on the basis of refuge, right? A verse of refuge will always precede such Dharma activities. Verses of refuge also precede every Dharma teaching, right? So the verse of refuge is always helpful and always fundamental, right? Okay, so this was my explanation of the thoughts of refuge in brief. We don't have, of course, much time to go into it much further, so I'll leave that there. And now I'll go into the topic of the precepts of refuge, and then afterwards, bodhicitta. All right, so there are in total 12 precepts of refuge. This first 6 are called the specific precepts, and then there are 6 common precepts. So I'm going to explain them in brief, but they are extremely important to understand well, right? And to give an analogy of refuge precepts, right? Let's say that you've broken a law, you end up in jail, and you place your hopes and trust in some high-level person like a lawyer or politician or whoever to help you get out of this situation. And this person who can help you get out of this situation will devise a plan for you. He'll say, first you do this, then that. And he'll say, if you follow my instructions, I can help you. If you don't, I can't do anything. The refuge precepts are the same. You have to follow them to derive the benefits, right? Just like a patient has to follow the doctor's orders if they have any hope of recovering. So starting with the first 6, which are the specific precepts of refuge, the first one is not going for refuge or propitiating worldly gods once you have taken refuge in the Buddha, right? Because worldly gods can't help you become free from samsara because they are not free from it themselves. So if you think that they have superior advice to offer that is better than the Buddha's advice, for example, then you're contradicting or going against this precept. If you need to get some worldly activity done, right, whether it be accomplishing a worldly goal or, I don't know, procuring food, right, something on a low level, that's fine. You can propitiate or offer respect to these deities for that aim. The second specific precept of refuge is having gone for refuge to the Dharma, you should no longer harm sentient beings, right? That's self-explanatory. The third is having gone to refuge to the Sangha, you should, and it says verbatim, you should no longer acquaint yourself with non-Buddhists. Specifically, it uses the word tirthikas, but it means essentially non-Buddhists. But we need to explain what this means because nowadays, even within our own families, we have multi-faith families, we have friends of different faiths, we have neighbors of different faiths. It wouldn't make sense to no longer associate with them. In fact, it would be wrong to think that way, right? We should be friendly with everybody. So the point is, you should be careful of the religious advice and views that they talk about. It's okay to entertain discussion with them, but you should be conscious of if it is undermining your refuge in the 3 jewels, right? That you're not getting swayed into a different mode of thinking. That's all it means. But otherwise, it's completely fine to befriend people of other religions. So these first 3 precepts are telling us what not to do. So they're prohibitive or proscriptive. The next 3 of the specific precepts are prescriptive, so telling us what to do. So the 4th one relates to images of the Buddha. So having gone for refuge to the Buddha, you should respect any kind of image of the Buddha, no matter what it's made out of, right? A statue of the Buddha, for example, is not the Buddha. It's a representative of the Buddha. But because the Buddha is no longer here with us in person, there are benefits to be derived from using his image right, as part of our practice. So what we usually do is we put the gold and silver and bronze statues up higher, and then we put aside or put below older or like slightly damaged statues or ones made of wood. And we consider their value in terms of monetary value. But that's wrong because a statue of the Buddha has no monetary value. They're equal in being representations of the Buddha. So they should be respected equally. And also, one needs to keep in mind where and how we're using images of the Buddha. Some people use them as features in their house, like they'll put them in inappropriate places, like under the stairs or places that get dusty or dirty. And that's not good, it's a fault. So, as part of the precept of the fourth precept, one should be respectful towards all images of the Buddha. And then the fifth is having gone to refuge to the Dharma, one should respect even one word of Dharma as the Dharma jewel, right? As like the Dharma jewel. Okay, but before we get to that, sorry, I missed a bit. As for setting up the order of the image of the Buddha, right? I said that it shouldn't be done in terms of monetary value, but there is an order to images. So first in the order is a representation of the Buddha. Generally, when you get into Tantra, it can be a representation of your image, that is sorry, not your image, of the Yidam, that is the highest. And within this group is also included the gurus and any type of Buddha. And then below that are bodhisattvas, solitary realizers, and hearers. And then below those are Dharma protectors. Right, okay. So then moving on to what to do once you've taken refuge in the Dharma. It's to respect even a single word of Dharma, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean putting on a high level any word of Tibetan, right? Some people do have that idea that any Tibetan word is to be respected as highly as a word of Dharma, but that's not the case. It doesn't matter what language the Dharma is written in, right? They're all equally the Dharma. It's the content that is important. And then the sixth pertains to the Sangha jewel. So having gone for refuge in the Sangha jewel, one is to be respectful towards monks and their robes and so forth, but also keeping in mind that the real Sangha jewel is not any monk in society. The real Sangha jewel is those persons who have developed realizations of the Dharma. So, for example, Milarepa, Drumdumpa, and so forth were not monks, but they are Sangha jewels. But the reason we should respect monks is because they have certain qualities that we don't. And those qualities are the vows that they possess. And they possess higher pratimoksha vows than we do. So because they possess such vows, if we show respect towards them, then we accumulate merit. And likewise, if we disrespect them, we accumulate non-virtue. So that's important to keep in mind. So if I explain the 6 common precepts in brief, the first is to go for refuge by reflecting again and again on the qualities of the 3 jewels. The second is to always offer the first portion of your food or drink by recollecting the kindness of the 3 jewels. So this one in particular is a way to accumulate merit without spending a lot of money, right? Whatever food or drink you partake in, if you offer that first portion, it is a good way to accumulate merit and maintain your refuge. So the third is establishing others in the practice of refuge, which essentially means other persons who might not have a strong practice of refuge and so forth. You can give advice to them and help them go for refuge. The fourth is by recollecting the advantages and benefits, going for refuge 3 times in the day and 3 times at night, so after dusk. And that's a good way to not forget your refuge. The fifth is relying on the jewels no matter what action you're doing. So it's not saying that relying on the 3 jewels will lead to your success, but you should keep them in mind for whatever action you're undertaking as a good motivation, and not relying instead on worldly deities and so forth. So always keeping the 3 jewels in mind, no matter what you do. The sixth is not forsaking the 3 jewels at the cost of your life or even as a joke, right? So not disrespecting the 3 jewels even as a joke, right? And this isn't talking about a serious situation. That's just something that could happen day to day, you know? But a serious situation, which you're not likely to encounter, but was a possibility in the past, was a new ruler or a king capturing an area or a country and forcefully converting all of the inhabitants, right? Saying convert or die. And in such a case, the precept is to not convert, right? And the idea behind it is that if you die by maintaining your refuge in the 3 jewels, that is going to carry on into your future lives, right? Through your practice of refuge, your future lives are benefited, definitely. So that's what that means. So to summarize all of these precepts of refuge, essentially you can say it's to have faith in the 3 jewels, to not harm other sentient beings, and to always keep the 3 jewels in mind, right? Reflect on them again and again. The more you reflect on the 3 jewels, the more powerful your refuge becomes, right? We know that everything becomes stronger through habituation. Even mundane things like taking medicine or exercising. If you do them again and again, your potential only increases. So likewise with refuge, go for refuge again and again, and your potential will only increase. So I forgot to say one thing in relation to the Buddha's image. So whether you have an image of the Buddha in your home or you have one on your phone that you can look at, just looking at it once derives great merit, right? And we're not talking about a small amount of merit, just glancing at the image produces great merit. It is said that even if you get angry at the image of a Buddha painted on a wall, you accumulate great merit. So how could that be? It just sounds unbelievable. But it all comes back to the roots of virtue and the aspirational prayers made by Buddha Shakyamuni while he was a trainee on his path towards Buddhahood, right? And therefore, images of Buddha Shakyamuni have such potential for us to accumulate merit and purify our obscurations. If you think about it, like in a worldly way, some images are more valuable just because of their history, right? Some pieces of art, because of their connections to certain artists or periods of time, that gives them more value. Here, it's because the images are connected to a being who has made such great aspirational prayers. And this is said in sutra, specifically the White Lotus of Great Compassion, how even if you don't wish to accumulate roots of virtue, just by looking at images of the Buddha, you will accumulate roots of virtue for achieving Buddhahood. So that pretty much concludes the discussion of refuge. In my discussion of bodhicitta, the basis I will use for that is Lama Chopa or the Guru Puja. One, because it is a puja that you all do here. And so you're all familiar with it. And two, you've heard a lot of teachings on lamrim and lojong mind training. So it's nice to approach this topic using a slightly different text that you're still familiar with. So you've put up an image of the merit field, and that's exactly as I was explaining before. At the top, you can see the yidams, or meditational deities of the four tantras, and the lamas, the Buddhas. The Buddhas include all sorts of Buddhas like Medicine Buddha. And then, right, this is a tiered field of merit. As I was saying, there's levels to it and an order to things. So below the Yidams and the Buddhas are the solitary realizers. Below them are the hearers, and below them are the Dharma protectors. Right? Our habit, however, is different. When we encounter difficulties, we don't think straight away of the Buddha, but we think straight away of the Dharma protectors, and we go off to make a donation or make an alcohol offering to the monks who are doing the puja for the Dharma protectors, right? Inciting them to act on our behalf, which is okay, but fundamentally it should be based in correct refuge, right? Conviction and faith in the three jewels. If you do it in that way, it's acceptable. Other than that, it's questionable. Right, so that was the merit field and that was the order. So thank you for pulling that up. So now we move on to the topic of bodhicitta. So what is bodhicitta? It is said that bodhicitta is the butter that comes out of the milk of the sublime teachings, right? So if you churn the Buddha's teachings, right? You shake, 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 churn and churn and churn. What comes out of that is the butter of bodhicitta. And essentially, it is an attitude of kindness towards others. Famously, the Buddha said, do not perform any misdeed, right? Which is essentially not harming others, right? So that's the root of bodhicitta. Then he said, perform perfect virtues, which is essentially benefiting others, right? Which is also the root of bodhicitta. Completely tame your mind, right? Which is developing all qualities to their perfection, right? Increasing your faith, developing an altruistic attitude that transforms into bodhicitta. And he said, this is the teaching of the Buddha, right? So that's what bodhicitta is. And it's not being kind to only one or two beings, but it's a kindness towards all beings. For example, if you help one person just once, everybody will praise you for that. Everyone appreciates that. It doesn't matter what religion you're a part of, everyone will say, that's a virtuous thing to do. So you can imagine with this attitude of bodhicitta that does not seek to help just one being, but all, and not once, but at all times. You accumulate great, great merit through engendering such an attitude. And it is said that such an attitude delights the whole world, including the gods, right? So, as said before, that one's merit is what determines one's success, right? One succeeds in whatever one does if one has the merit. Imagine the merit you accumulate from bodhicitta, and that helps one be successful in all one's activities. So I've started the discussion of bodhicitta, but we're essentially out of time. But if we just go through maybe one verse of Lama Chopa, we can continue the rest later. So these verses pertaining to developing the mind of bodhicitta come quite deep into the Guru Puja. So the first verse we're starting with is verse 89, which reads, having considered how all these miserable beings have been my mothers and have raised me with kindness again and again, I seek your blessings to develop effortless compassion like that of a loving mother for her precious child. So we can go through the entire verse, and essentially it is a meditation starting from equanimity, then moving on to the recognition of beings as one's mother, recollecting their kindness, and developing compassion for them in that way. So it's important to start with generating equanimity, because if you don't, then your compassion will be biased, right? You'll only have thoughts of compassion to those who are dear to you and still ignore everybody else, which is unacceptable. So first we need to level the ground and understand that all sentient beings are one's mothers who are stuck in a miserable situation, right? And they're miserable because they are tormented by karma and afflictions. So then we, in the next line, consider their kindness. They have raised me with kindness again and again. So whether you approach the development of bodhicitta by way of equalizing and exchanging yourself with others, or by this sevenfold cause and effect instruction process, they all start with these thoughts. So some people will prefer to think of all sentient beings as one's mother. Other people will prefer to think of them as one's father, because maybe they have some sort of difficult relationship with their mother in this life, or with their father, or with both parents, and therefore it's okay if you just think of a relative who has been really, really kind to you and raised you in this lifetime, right? That's the most important thing. And then applying that to all sentient beings. It then says, I seek your blessings to develop effortless compassion like that of a loving mother for her precious child. So in your practice, you'll be visualizing the merit field at this point as you recite this, and you're asking for blessings. So blessings are a transformative power. So you're essentially asking to have your mind transformed into this mode of thinking, right? That's what it means to ask for blessings. So since we're out of time, I'll do one or two questions if you have them. Feel free to ask them now.
Thank you, Rinpoche, for your teaching. This question is regard to the meditation that homework we're supposed to do. So in my meditation, when I visualize the Buddha's image, 3D, light, the good qualities, but when I start to think about the feeling of going for refuge and the small scope, middle scope, my image of Buddha disappear. No more Buddha, only feeling. And then when I say, okay, Buddha come back, but feeling no more. So how now?
Okay. Yeah. I think Rinpoche understood your question as well. It's straightforward. So basically, there's an order to the meditation, and when you visualize the Buddha's image, you can't think of the causes of refuge relating to smaller, middle, and great scope. And then when you think of those causes of refuge, the image of the Buddha disappears. So there's sort of this dissonance between them, and you can't maintain them at the same time. So how to maintain them at the same time, right? So it's completely true, right? First, first of all, it requires a lot of effort to visualize the image of the Buddha, right? You have to put in a bit more effort in the early stages to get a clear image. And you have to hold that image for a bit longer as you're training your mind, right? And then you switch to thinking about the causes of refuge, fear and faith, and you think about those. And because you're not so familiarized yet, you have to put a bit more effort into thinking about those. So your mind becomes completely focused on those. And you lose the image of the Buddha, which is okay. That's 100% going to happen because our mind can't hold multiple objects at the same time, right? That's normal. So in the early stages, you spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10, 15, just meditating on the image of the Buddha, right? Then you switch to the causes of fear and faith. And then once you've finished thinking about those, you think, who has the ability to protect me from the frights of samsara and lead me to liberation? Again, you recollect the image of the Buddha, right? As the one who has that ability. So again, you see the Buddha image. And when you see the Buddha image at that time, you're not going to lose your feeling that arose when you contemplated fear and faith, right? Because you spent some time doing it. So first, it requires some effort, and it's a process of habituation. You do this meditation day to day. Over time, the thoughts and the images start to come by themselves, right? It becomes easier. So if it's the case that you're losing the image completely, like when you start reciting the verse of refuge after you've contemplated the causes, then it's just a matter of training more and more day by day.